and the other panelists who are part of this particular session to come up on the podium. Masamba, you have the floor.
Thank you, Nitin. And good afternoon to you again, and welcome to this session of the Global Innovation Hub. And just come in. You can come on the stage directly. Please. So good afternoon, and welcome to this roundtable focusing on an expanded innovation agenda and the post-SDG era. My name is Masamba Choi. I'm the project executive of the UN Climate Change Global Innovation Hub, an initiative of the UNFCCC Secretariat at COP26. We have launched this initiative to explore to what extent we can leverage innovation to serve the many people and the planet. And it's why the discussion of today is very important for us. It's about exploring possibilities of a story, but about climate, but a different story. A story that will be more, let's say, holistic, focusing on sustainability, or even regeneration, rather than just climate. A story that focuses on providing solution, not on the problem of climate. And to have this discussion, we have several panelists, very interesting panel of people that will be able to exchange on this idea. But before we start the interaction, the dialogue, there are some first a presentation that will be made, and then a film. Do we have the presentation ready? The one from Dennis to start. Yeah, so I will give you the floor, Dennis, for your presentation.
Thank you, Masamba, and thank you everyone for this very innovative roundtable that seems very straight to me, but I think that's appropriate. We're ahead of the time. And this reminds me when I launched a report back in 2002 about the role of digitalization. Almost no one attended, but it was probably the most important thing I did at this conference. I think to some extent this is similar also. The post-SDG, the next generation of sustainability work, might be the most important thing to really shape the coming decades. And how should we think about this? Because most of us now know about the 7 SDG targets and work, etc. And it's been fantastic work, but it's so far from where we need to be. So that's why, when Masamba and I discussed this, that when we work these couple of years now with expanded climate innovation agenda, the Global Innovation Hub and Mission Innovation, there's something that is lacking, and it's this narrative, a positive narrative. So that's why I wanted to talk about, because we basically said a new SDG, post-SDG agenda needs to have 3 things. It needs to have some sort of structure that helps us guide towards a positive goal. We have suggested there should be 11 billion people on a flourishing, a resilient planet in balance. So basically leaving half for the rest of biodiversity, so we need to be super resource efficient. but then also that everyone should see that they have a flourishing life. Not about moving people out of poverty. That is not enough. Of course, we need to do that. But for young people around the world, they should not feel, oh, the goal is for me to live on $3 instead of $1. No, I should live flourishing lives. I should be an artist. I should be enjoying life. I should contribute to society. That should be the vision, and we can do that. The second is, how do we do this? What kind of framework do we need? What kind of incentives do we create for difference? Right now, for instance, in business, the incentive is money. But we think maybe money should be seen as breathing for a human being. Of course you need to breathe. But if I ask you, what's the meaning of life? Breathing. No, it's more. So it's just the fundamental. So the question is not that you make money. What do you make with that money? Why do you exist as a company? Of course, making profit is nice, but in what way are you making people's life flourish? And the last one, and the one we're going to focus on here, is the narrative. We have seen many youth with very much passion protest against the problems. That is great. But they should not just protest against the problems. They should also fight for the future they want to have. And I think that's lacking a bit now, that it's not just about fighting against the bad things. It's also being part of creating the future. So, okay, so those images are not downloaded, so I'll skip those. Maybe it's secret. But this is what we talk about when we started this work a few years ago. We said, it is important for companies to reduce their emissions. And we should keep on doing that. But what happens if we don't focus on sectors and problems, but also human needs and solution providers? So people can see who is helping us creating better education, providing sustainable nutrition, allowing us to go to the outdoor, to create music, poetry, art, to be people. Who are providing those solutions and what do they need? So we thought that framework might be something that we can add to the SDGs. So instead of just having SDGs saying we're going to reduce poverty, we're going to stop deforestation, all these great things that we're going to stop the bad, what if we also have goals to say who are giving solutions that are allowing 11 billion people to flourish? Who have educational solutions that are not? Because much of the things that are done in the West right now that are called green and sustainable is not possible in a world with 11 billion people, not even 8 billion people today, because we use too much resources. So sometimes we call things green and sustainable in the West, but we forget that other people also have the right to live, or other living beings have the right to exist. So we talk about using all the natural resources and only for people in the West. That's not enough. And that's what we said, for instance, with companies, we have introduced the idea of two parts. We need climate risk innovation. That is when you look at, I emit something, I need to reduce my emissions. Great, you need to do that. Supply chain management, etc. But the really important thing is, what service do I provide in society? And how can I make money on providing those? And that is a very different ballgame. And almost no the companies that are invited here are only those who are in the lower circle that are saying, we are reducing lots of emissions. And that's great. Let them give them the space. But we also need those who say, I'm giving solutions that are sustainable for people. And here I think there are many other stakeholders who are not even engaged here. Many local communities who are helping people provide everything from music, engagement, outdoor experiences that could come here, where people live flourishing lives. But they don't have big problems, but they are not really seen, because we focus on the problems of the fast food industry instead of those providing sustainable nutrition. We're focusing on the problem in the fast fashion industry instead of those who are providing smart wardrobes for people to live flourishing lives. And again, it's not bad. We need to make sure that we reduce the problems. But what if we have a much more engaging, positive narrative around the solutions? And I just give an example of the outdoor industry that we're going to launch now this Monday. Because today, these shoes, these trousers, these shirts, etc., when you look at them, they say, how do you do this from a problem perspective? We're going to reduce emissions from these things. But actually, that's not very important. Because we have a system where the last 15 years, we have increased the size of the wardrobes by twice, and we use clothing half the time. So what kind of wardrobes we have? Overconsumption. But that is not being asked today. So we need to move from the products to the system, to the wardrobes. But then we can't just say, oh, we have nice wardrobes. What kind of wardrobes do we have? Do we have wardrobes that make us insecure, who want to take Instagram photos, to buy more, to feel a little bit of a dopamine kick? Or do we have wardrobes that helps us take care of our elders, be out in nature, create music, be content? And the last part then that we also say, what we need to do, and that's why Masamba has been a leader in, we need to rethink and not just say, this is what is possible today. We need to ask what is needed. And if that is not possible today, how do we change legislation, economic incentives, values? And this is the plotted graph, and you can download that on our webpage. It's just saying that if you also have a single mind focus on climate, we run the risk of destroying the planet by just shifting to biofuels. And if we only look at the rich people, we run the risk of not looking at how we provide solutions for 11 billion people. So we created this innovation quadrant for 11 billion people to say that, you know, Masamba has been a really champion of this. We can't just say we're going to have better cars or electrification of cars. We need to ask, why are we driving cars even? Because 11 billion people cannot have electric cars in the way we have cars in the West. We need to think about sharing, public transport, virtual meetings, 3D printing, virtual meetings that are as exciting as other meetings. So how do we think about the actual underlying human needs in that? So that kind of tools might be needed. So how do we guide us to see that we are providing what the world really needs? And then finally, and this is also a very complex graph, but it's trying to say, how do we create an innovation ecosystem for the future? Because today, our innovation ecosystem is basically just focused on technologies and trying to make current systems slightly better. But what if we start with the innovation system by saying flourishing lives, and then ask who needs to collaborate? And it's not just about technology. It's about values, economic systems, marketing that are shaping the way we think, because we don't think that things are beautiful just because they are objectively beautiful. Those things are being shaped, but by whom? So we need to have a deeper discussion also about what do we think is a flourishing life. Is it to have a super yacht and 350 pair of shoes in your wardrobes? Or is it to sit with your children watching a sunset and learning about the space and nature and reflecting and writing poetry? Both very nice lives, but one might not be compatible with 11 billion people, the other one might be. And even more interesting, when we've done interviews, more people say that they want to be with family, they want to create, they want to give something. But then when they live in our society, they consume. It was now during this COVID epidemic, people asked, why are you doing certain consumption things? They said, because I don't want to just be buying, sitting in front of my computer, buying new clothing, buying all these gadgets. I want to be with family. I want to create. I want to be someone who gives something to society. And I think we need to bring back the conversation to that also, saying, what kind of lives are we providing for? So that's where I'm going to end. And you're saying that we created this little framework by saying basically three things. We need to have a positive vision for the future. We need to understand who can give that future. And we need to say, what do we need to avoid? Because some of the new technologies, like AI, nanotechnology, biotechnology, also threaten civilizations. So we have very powerful tools, but those tools can also destroy us. Those of you who have seen Oppenheimer, the movie, might recall that they said that that was the first time when humanity thought that we might kill ourselves because the atomic bomb might self-ignite the atmosphere. But we have more technologies on that level also. So we should not just look at the super optimistic future. We also need to acknowledge that we as humans now have more power than gods had for people living in the past. We can do things with the planet within ourselves that we were beyond the reach of gods in the early cultures. So that also comes with a big responsibility. So I'll end there with a positive message of 11 billion people living flourishing lives and hand over to the next speaker.
Thank you so much, Dennis. I think that was actually a brilliant holistic approach to the ecosystem. And I think from our perspective, you know, we've had so many conversations with the public sector, with the private sector, and we feel that the component that is often forgotten is community. and that's the everyman, right? And it's the 11 billion people that you mentioned. And so for us, 2 months ago, we launched a digital storytelling platform and community engagement collective called the Climate Tribe. And going back to the origins, it really came down to the fact that each of these people, each of these community members has a story, right? We all have a story. A lot of the time, these stories are not told. And the reason is there aren't enough platforms out there, people shy away, people are doing incredible things. And you touched on the importance of mindset change and behavioral change, right? Where does that behavioral change often come from? It comes from what we learn from our communities, it comes from the knowledge that's handed down through generations. And we wanted to really make sure that we were almost creating a bridge. So we're based out of Abu Dhabi, and we recognized that there was a real gap when it came to understanding the depth of understanding of both the challenge that's faced when it comes to climate change here in the Middle East, but also a lack of understanding around what the solutions are. So our focus really is on how do we mobilize people and empower people to be part of that solution. So yes, it is about the mindset change in terms of how can I consume less, but also to recognize that I have the power and I have the ability to actually go out and create solutions as well. And I think a big part of that is actually going to come from how do we create the infrastructure that's going to allow us to have a two-way dialogue. Because if you're going to create a solution, the first thing you need to do is actually speak to the people, understand how they're being affected. So I mentioned that we're based out of Abu Dhabi. We're very fortunate to be, here in the UAE. And if we look around, yes, we feel the extreme heat. But beyond that, do we really see the rising sea levels? Do we see the forest fires? Do we see the extreme flooding? We see it on the news, we see it communicated through media platforms, but do we hear from the people who are actively being affected by this? And if we're not able to hear from them, then at what point do we create that sense of connection? So I think for me, just carrying on from what you said is, yes, it is about the holistic, but it is also about listening. And I've been so impressed with how much emphasis there's been on storytelling this COP. I feel that there is a recognition of that. People understand the need for authenticity when it comes to the sharing of messages. But now we really need to start thinking about the second part, which is how does that translate into action? And I think that's where this discussion is going to be really key. So that's my 2 cents, and I'd love to hear what Robin has to say in response to that.
Thanks a lot. Super interesting. So you just gave the right keyword, action. I'm more here from the digital perspective. I wanted to share a concrete example of how we brought the Green Digital Action track together, so really focusing on action. But first, maybe just before I go into the presentation and the short video, I think, there were very, very, very interesting things that were said there. So first, Dennis, I thought it was super interesting that you said, when you spoke about digitalization the first time many, many years ago, and now many are realizing how important it is for like the whole climate agenda, from the positive but also negative aspects. So you've touched on digital, that there is immense potential, and there is indeed. They have great potential to fast track the SDG agenda overall. Just going into more, and we can discuss this hopefully further in the discussion part. But even mainstreaming this environmental mindset and PV programs. There's great projects where they are mainstreaming it in gaming gaming already. You know, I mean, imagine you're just watching a TV program and somebody properly recycles their PET bottle that they're drinking, you know, just like this underlying feature, you know, throughout, that people just start to realize it more and more. So there's definitely more potential, but we've come to COP with the Green Digital Action Program knowing that digital has a great potential, but to leverage this potential, they need to keep their own house in order, because you can't just say, you know, we're great, we can help the world to do better, to like, you know, support other industries with making their supply chains greener, to move towards circular economies, if the digital sector continues to emit greenhouse gas emissions, continues to have more and more energy consumption, material usage, and so on and so forth. So I'll just briefly talk about what we have come to COP with, and then based on this, I'd be very excited to go into more detail. Can I get the clicker? Thanks a lot. All right, so we've come, not just us, but together with over 40 partners. So it also is really nice to be here to speak about collaborative endeavors, because this was really a collaborative endeavor with private sector, with UN, with development banks, and so on, governments as well. So what we've wanted to achieve. So the context, I've briefly mentioned it, digital can be a key enabler for diverse climate solutions and also the wider SDG agenda overall. But on the other hand, there are these negative impacts like e-waste, like greenhouse gas emissions, and so on. So our objective was really to strengthen the collaboration across the industry, but not just come to COP with yet another panel and yet another panel where it's discussed that we need more collaboration, but we've basically put the collaboration part before COP. So we've started early this year to really gather these partners and come together throughout the year to discuss, okay, what are key breakthrough areas where we can really make a difference? And then use COP as the platform to speak about the first progress made, but also invite others to join. So this is where you can really see the approach. So throughout the first 3 months, we had these several co-creation workshops across different pillars. Now we're at COP, and it definitely has to continue, because otherwise it is just yet another panel with empty words, but it's all about like follow through. So I just wanted to give a few examples of the outcomes, because today is actually the last day of the Green Digital Action Track. We've had almost 20 sessions, like partner sessions, but also breakthrough sessions. And today at 5 p.m. is our closing. So come and join us here. We even have music. So just some of the key outcomes that we've managed to achieve. So a first group of companies has agreed to set 1.5-degree aligned science-based targets, create transition plans, and make their greenhouse gas emissions reporting publicly available into a transparent database. So that's really fantastic to increase transparency across the industry. And here the important thing as well, going back to the collaboration notion, that is not just about those companies that are based in regions where it's rather easy to transition to renewable energy, but the project is all about involving those that are in regions where it's not that easy, and see how we can support each other across the sector. So on another related pillar, we had a green standards pillar. There as well, here we have launched an action plan to support industry in the implementation of green standards. So again, it's all about peer learning, bringing the industry closer together to support each other and moving towards environmental sustainability practices. And I just put this slide up that you can really see that it's not just about coming to COP, but it's really been like a year-long effort. So you can see all the working groups that are on there, all the plans that were done, and so on. So it was really much more than just putting together a panel. Then on circular electronics industry, so across the different pillars we had these calls for action, which was really the foundation for building the collaborative efforts. So we had a call for action here on for member states to set e-waste regulation targets, for other entities, especially also private sector, to come forward and support member or governments in the e-waste regulation journey. Because again, there it's not just a government effort, it's really all about the holistic picture of how public and private sector need to come together. And sorry, just going back once. On this one, for example, we had a fantastic project that we announced here at COP where the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is now helping 3 developing countries in supporting with the e-waste regulation. So there's really fantastic value in in like governments, industry, and so on coming together. And then lastly, on emergency telecommunications, again, we had these calls for action, and we had a great set of outcomes as well. So mobile operators came forward and said that they will support the Early Warnings for All initiative, which is an initiative across different UN entities to make sure that by 2027, every person on the earth is covered by early warnings. So there we had, for example, the mobile operators, representatives from the industry saying they will support the early warnings for all through cell broadcast. We have the Global Satellite Operations Association also saying they will support early warnings through direct-to-device. And then a country as well that came forward to implement early warnings for all through cell broadcast. So really fantastic progress. And then this afternoon we'll speak more about the monitoring, so I won't go into detail on that. So yeah, we had this fantastic program with the closing today, and I just basically wanted to share this with you as a concrete example of really this collaboration. I mean, it's very much focused on governments, industry, so it's really interesting to know, I think, open the discussion to see also, how can we leverage this to inspire other industries? How can we leverage this to involve more the community aspect as well in it, and so on. So thanks a lot.
Yeah, maybe we can also view the video before we start.
Yeah, if it's there, we can, but if not, it's not a problem.
In a world where the future is intertwined with technology, a new era of collaboration is dawning. Digital technologies can be key enablers in our fight against climate change. From climate monitoring to early warning systems, from energy efficiency to circular economies. Accelerating digital innovation can help shape a sustainable future for us all. But as the digital realm expands, so does its impact on our planet. Energy consumption, emissions, material usage, and e-waste are soaring. The global digital transformation must go hand in hand with a shift to green energy and circular economies. Fighting the climate crisis requires everyone to get on board. Partners from across the industry are uniting for green digital action. Together, they aim to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, material use and waste linked to the information and communication technology sector, and leverage digital technologies to build sustainable economies and societies for a truly sustainable digital transformation and climate resilient world. Let's put the digital tech industry on the right side of history. Join Green Digital Action.
Great. Thank you. So we have seen the broader picture with the presentation made by Denise, focusing on the future that we would like to build. We had the intervention of Manal insisting on the need to engage with community. And then we have the presentation of one type of solution, which is digital technology that can contribute in achieving the future that we want. So now maybe coming to things that are more specific, more concrete. For the Global Innovation Hub, we have a vision about how innovation can be used to serve the many people and the planet. So they are articulated around some key elements. One, the first is we need to have a moonshot way of thinking. We should not set our goal and our target on the basis of our perception of what is possible, but on the basis of what is needed. And we expect the gap between what is needed and what is currently possible to be the driver of innovation. The second aspect that is very important is that we are not focusing at the sectoral level, because we know that at the sectoral level, innovation can only lead to incremental change. And also, it will not address some of the big challenges also that we have on top of climate. You may reduce emission at the sectoral level, but your action could have a negative impact on biodiversity or sustainable production and consumption or on land use. So for example, shifting from combustion car to electric vehicle can definitely have a positive impact on climate, but it may lead to negative impact when it comes to managing our natural resources. It can have a negative impact somewhere else. And we need to consider all these things holistically. It's why for us it's very important to go back to the core human needs and try to see how innovation can be used to address the core human needs for the many people, but do it in a way that is aligned with all the climate and sustainability goals. Doing it in a way that is aligned with the climate goal, that enhance biodiversity and regenerate our lands. And by doing so, we expand the space for innovation. This is why we are saying we are promoting an expanded innovation agenda, because if you go back to the core human need and explore how innovation can help satisfy them while being aligned with the healthy planet, you see popping up solutions that you will not see if you just focus at the sectoral level. So for example, if you focus at the sectoral level, when it comes to animal farming, we will say, how can we reduce the emission of that sector, because you are at the sectoral level. Now, if you go back to the need and you ask, why are we doing animal farming? You say, because we need protein. We need to consume protein. And then the next question is, how can we use innovation to satisfy the need for protein while being aligned with the climate and sustainability goal? And then you can see popping up solutions that you cannot see if you stay at the sectoral level. So you can see, for example, lab-grown meat. You can see a protein that is coming from plant-based protein. These solutions, you will not be able to see them if you just focus at the sectoral level. Same when we are talking about transport system. If you just focus at the sectoral level, automotive sector, you will say we need to shift from combustion car to electric vehicle. You never ask the question, why do we need car at the first place? And it's only when you go back to the core human needs, mobility, and then access to product and services that you can see that there are alternative solutions, like using the spatial digital technologies such as GIS, GPS, and remote sensing to build a 15-minute city through land use planning and site selection, so that you can identify where to place your school, where to place your healthcare services, so that most of the product and services that are required will be accessible to most of the people within 15-minute distance by walking or biking. So it means people will need less car. And you can go even one step further, because mobility is not a purpose, it's a means. The purpose that is behind mobility is access to product and services. So can we use digital technology to be able to access product and services without being mobile? Like virtual learning and so and so. So this is very important for us, because it is what helps to address some of the challenges that we are facing in a holistic manner. What is it that is needed? and how innovation can help satisfy the need while being aligned with the climate and sustainability goal. By doing so, you can not only address climate, but also promote sustainable production, sustainable consumption, enhance biodiversity, and land regeneration. Another aspect that is very important for us is we consider that integrated approach are needed to address the challenge of climate. Innovative technology only will not suffice. We need to be able to combine innovative technology, innovative policy, innovative financial instrument, innovative business model, and so and so. And this is only when we have all these things combined that we can have a response that can lead to upscaling. Because otherwise you will have always a bottleneck somewhere. You have the technology, but you don't have the right policy. You have the technology, but you do not have the right policy instrument. Like what is happening currently in Namibia. Namibia is one of the countries with the highest potential for green hydrogen production. But the interest rate in this country is 18%. So you can do nothing with that. Particularly the green solution, because of the high intensity of capital upfront. So if the interest rates are very high, you cannot implement any type of such type of project. So we also know that it's very important to have a systemic approach, systemic thinking. The way we are innovating the current framework is not suitable for climate and sustainability innovation. We cannot have a linear innovation. It has to be interactive. We cannot have a product push innovation. We need to have a more demand-driven innovation. You define the needs, and the needs are the driver for innovation. We cannot have an innovation in silo, closed, but it has to be an open innovation with radical collaboration, because the complexity of the challenge and interconnection across issues make it extremely difficult to have a good response to this challenge if we are not radically collaborating. So we need to do the right things around the needs, and we need to do it rightly with a systemic approach. Now, once you have said all these things, the next question is, now how do we translate all these things into, let's say, element that can inspire action? Because at the end of the day, what we want is to have action on the ground. All these principles are good, but they have to be shared, and they have to inspire action on the ground. So how do we tell the story? What is it that we can share with the many people so that two things happen? They understand the future that we want to build and take ownership of it, share the vision. They want to be part of the journey, so it means that they want to contribute in building that future. And they have clarity about what they can get out of this future. What type of story and what format of story is needed so that people are inspired to act. They want to be part of the journey, and they have clarity about what they can expect from this future. These are the questions that were very important for us, and we are exploring how to go about it. And it changed from what we have currently when it comes to climate, for example, raising awareness for raising public awareness on climate, because the focus has been so far on the collapse. What is happening what will happen if we are not doing enough climate action? So can we be clear about the future that we want to build, And can we make others share that vision and contribute in building that future? And how can we tell a story that can facilitate that? These are the questions I would like us to also address that are more, let's say, specific. We know the bigger picture, what we want, and now how do we tell the story in a way that it inspires action?
I can start, maybe. I think this is a very fundamental question about how do you move from an idea to action. The story in itself is important. Just by talking about flourishing life instead of reductions, that in itself is a story to be told, that we're moving from one set. We sometimes, with a bit of humor, try to say that we're moving from a story about a fossil-free typewriter to exciting new solutions for the future. Because if you only try to reduce things, if you would have done that 30 years ago, we would sit here with fossil-free typewriters, not the digital revolution. That would not have happened. So that's the first thing, I think, just telling that story that we are not trying to do what we do today less bad, but we're trying to create a better tomorrow. That's the first thing in that story. But the second thing is also, I think, who do we actually target? Because when you talk about solutions, many people think about technologies. But what are the storytellers? What are the people who are PR agencies, media houses, those who shape what we think is attractive? Those need to be brought into the room and say, what kind of future are you trying to create? When I look at the billboard, when I look at my TV, when I look at the ads coming up, what kind of life do you present as attractive? Is it one with caring for the planet, or is one with flashy, short dopamine? That is a fundamental question to be had. And I think that's very exciting. And that's where I'm very excited about these sort of platforms with communities also, because this tension between what we do and what we want to do is something that many people share and feel frustrated about. So I think that it's a big power in bringing this in. And I think I mentioned that before, that we work with brain scientists and ask the questions. Is one of the big challenges that we have mental pollution. We are dopamine driven. We have short-term urges that are pumped into us. Our old Stone Age body reacted to, we want sweet food, we want sweet things, we want to take things because we have this lack. But now those kind of drivers are making us to overconsumption, people, of everything. So who is driving that, and how do we suffer from that? So that's sort of how we do. But I think the main first thing, I think it's very simple. Just bring what Masamba just said and said, what if you as a city, you as a company, you as an organization say, how many flourishing life years have I contributed to? When I saw one of the big IT companies now launch their new AI, what was the first example that I saw? How do I make cupcakes? So are we going to invest, building new polluting things and investing in something, and what we're looking for is how to make cupcakes? That company, I think no one mentioned, should feel a bit ashamed. If this is what the best we can do, in an age when people are suffering and people are doing amazing things, the best we can come up with is cupcakes. Jesus, if people wonder why the digital industry don't have much credibility, if that is what you think AI is needed for, that is a bit of an insult to a world that is burning, a world where so much exciting things is happening. So that, I think, is by parking what Masamba said and say, can you show how many people will get a better life on this? And yeah, sure, there are some people who like to have their cupcakes, but ask them, is this the most important thing in your life? Most people will probably say no. I want the AI to help me connect with my friends, to get me out in nature, to learn poetry, to learn a new language, to be part of a community that is actually helping each other. Give those examples, and I think we come a long way. So that kind of profile, I actually hope that we can profile your platform, also say, this is a solution provider. And it's also something, the last thing I want to talk about, we think too much large scale. that we want to look at these enormous things. The reason we look at green hydrogen, we look at CCS, is the enormous technologies. They might have their place, but local communities, millions of them, are doing small steps. So therefore, we need those kind of platforms also that can bring those together and make a collective voice and saying, they might not seem like much, each of them, but together, that's where life is born.
I absolutely love this word that you use, which is flourish. And I think there's such a misconception when it comes to, if I want to be part of the solution, I must sacrifice. And I think that's something that we really need to change in terms of that mindset shift, right? Where if I am contributing to change, I can do so while still flourishing, while still thriving. And it's not just about me as an individual, but it's about the collective. And that's actually spot on when it comes to what we're trying to do. You know, we had many conversations with people here in the UAE who understood that there's a problem and they wanted to make a change. But the question was, what difference will it make if I do something, right? What difference will it make if I make a small change? But what people are forgetting is that if we all thought that way, we would never have any kind of progress. If we look at it historically, we would never, ever have any progress. And so I think Masamba raised a really good point as well, which was, you know, we can inspire people to go out and create solutions, but where is the demand? And so we need to think about that as well. If we're creating these brilliant solutions that are going to contribute to increasing mobility or you know, sustainable agriculture, we first need to make sure that there is enough of a demand, because ultimately, yeah, we do need to think about the economics of it, right? For it to be a viable business case. So I think from our perspective, the storytelling is yes, about encouraging people to go out and make change, but it's also about mindfulness. It's about a collective consciousness where people think twice when they make certain consumer decisions. When they kind of think, okay, I have purchasing power, therefore that in itself is contributing to something. And Robin, I think you raised a really important point, which was you mentioned gaming and films. And I think, you know, right now we're talking about how can we tell stories that are going to authentically highlight these innovations and solutions. But ultimately, I hope that we get to a point where in mainstream film or video games that the conscious choices that are made are just part of the norm. So that, because that's how we build habits as well. So how can we use storytelling through these different mediums to create new habits that will ultimately create the demand that will then pave the way for these solutions, you know?
Thank you. All very interesting points. Actually, rather than like contributing something, I have just many questions in my head, so I'll just throw them out there and see if you if you can respond to them. No, one thing that came to my mind is, well, a flourishing mind is for every single person something else. A flourishing life is for every single person something different, you know. So how do you come up with like what does it mean, a flourishing world, a flourishing life? I mean, I would hope, of course, that you measure it according to, you know, like the biodiversity, for example, or of course, you know, temperature and so on. So, but breaking it down on the individual level, for some, a flourishing life is having a big family. For others, it is having a lot of money on your bank account and so on. So where does this come in? And this is going back to what Masamba said in the beginning. You know, you need to bring many people around the table and, you know, come to these, I would say, common denominators of what it means. And then you can go out to what Dennis said, you know, speak to the media and so on to make this mainstream, you know, that it is there. But it's really tricky, you know, to dictate what it means in the end. So, and then the other, you know, co-creating this notion of what does it mean. It is a long process, you know, through Green Digital Action we saw as well. I mean, it took us several months to come to the breakthrough areas to make first progress and so on. So it is a big, and we were only with like 40 plus partners, you know. So how do you bring, like, I'd say almost the entire world and the different communities around the table to come to this joint notion? So in terms of like the action focus, I'd be really interested to have, you know, your concrete next steps that you would suggest.
Here's the short thing on that. I think what is interesting is that brain science can actually help us, that what we think, because people say, what do you want? And then people see that a lot of things that are destructive, this overconsumption, is not something that people actually want when they're reflected. You don't need to be very sophisticated. Look at New Year's resolutions, where people say, what do I want? Usually they say, I want to be more with my family. I want to have a healthier body. I want to do these things. Why don't they? And that's where I think we need to have the conversation also about companies have a responsibility today, not just to sell things. And that's where we have said, for instance, 3 areas that really needs to look deeper into is fast fashion, fast food, and fast social media. Because what they do is trigger our dopamine, our urge for the quick. And they are undermining our capacity to think long term. So it's like we're living in a polluted society for our brains. So if we start discussing that and say, no one wanted that, and there was a lot of things was doing sort of under good circumstances and an idea to provide something. But now, as a collective, we need to discuss how does the community does that. It's not that it's bad with fast food, but if it's the only thing that is everywhere, then young children will not have healthy food habits. So how do we break that? And that's not the individual fast food owner. It's us together that needs to discuss how should cities look like. So I think I'm much more optimistic when we look at what people actually want. So that's the first thing. And then I think what I hope one of the biggest changes that this narrative can have is that we will end consumers and only think ourselves as investors. It's not me buying something. I'm giving money to something that is creating the future. So how will the money be used? And I think if companies can thinking about not as customers, but as users and co-creators, I think we can have a fundamental shift in communities also thinking, when I buy these shoes or these trousers or this phone, what future do I contribute to? Who else will benefit from that? What is the next innovation that will be done? How do they do that? Is a large proportion of my cost actually paid for trying to convince me through marketing? Then it's a very weird product if that is what so much of my payment is actually trying to convince me that I need that. So I think there's some very interesting things with this positive narrative that could ask some deep questions about the next generation of how companies, cities, governments, and communities are working.
I think there is a strong connection between what you have said and what Manal was saying, what you have concluded with. So what we are saying, Dennis, is that at the start of the problem, we are in an environment that tends to pollute our brain and our mind. And as a consequence of that, we have bad habits and a lifestyle that is conducive to a demand for things that are not what can contribute in building the future that we want to build. So brain and mind that are negatively affected, lifestyle as a consequence of that, that is not aligned with the future that we want, a demand that is misaligned, and the development of an economy that is misaligned. So then coming back to the question that Manal was asking, so it means that then the starting point would be to act on the brain and the mind. How to do it so that people change their lifestyle, create a demand that is aligned with the future that we want to build, and then transform the economy. Because also I strongly believe that if you want to have something that is regenerative, even more than sustainable, regenerative, because I think we have produced so many bad things that it's not just about sustaining. We need first to regenerate before sustaining. So if you want to build that future, it is very important to have full commitment of individual citizen. It's not enough to work just on, let's say, the big picture. Each individual citizen need to be part of that that journey. So I think this is what is at the basis of this idea that the Global Innovation Hub within the UNFCCC Secretariat is looking at, and this is why we are engaging with potential partners to see how do we address best this issue. So if you want to respond to this crisis that start with our mind, our brain, and then our lifestyle, our habit, consumption habit, and then the economy in which we are living, if you want to change all that, what is the best way to do it? Is it by only showing the collapse that will get out of that? Or should we, the other way around, try to show something positive, an alternative world that we need to build together? And how to get there? What is the best way to do it? So that, because we want something that could be impactful in the sense that it will truly make people change their lifestyle and be willing to be part of the journey. So it means that it has to be compelling, and it has to have a reach. It's not just about changing 1% of the population on the earth, but it's really about reaching the large majority of the population of the earth. That's the specific question on which I would like to have your different perspective. What will be the best way to address this in a very effective manner?
I think I'd love to hear your thoughts, but I would like us to see, could this be the start of a movement when we challenge YouTube, Netflix, and all the big carriers, the TikToks and other social media, to show the kind of stories that you are telling and say, how do we bring those into mainstream? Because right now, we have some climate communication, very small, and it's on the side and for a few committed people. But the vast majority of people, that is not what they experience. They experience this, I don't know what kind of family that are buying new shoes or buying a super yacht on 150 meters or a sports car that is fossil still or something, and that is seen as cool. And if those stories are seen as marginal and on the side, they're seen as non-cool, not attractive. So how can we ask these big platforms to bring in those stories into the core? Because I think we failed in trying to make a separate story about climate, and that collides for many people, so that we see many young people, they feel frustrated because they know the truth about climate change, that it's serious. But at the same time, they say, the world cannot take it serious because everywhere I look on my social media, on my movies, etc., there seems to be no problem. There's superstars fighting about big challenges, or there's some dance in a cupcake or something. So is there really a crisis? There can't be a crisis and a beautiful world when this is all I see. So that would be my first saying, could we maybe you send out a letter to some of these stakeholders and say, the next 2 years, what stories do you tell that is compatible with 11 billion people, a flourishing life that use new technology, but also new stories and examples from the communities, and say, can we help together and measure especially young people? How do they experience this? How much of their world, when they look both physically but also digitally, are they being told to be a consumer, to be unhappy, to buy new fashion? And how much are they told to help people, to be part of a movement, to be experienced, to create something? And I think that would be my little challenge, and say, let's bring in the big platforms providers and connect them with other platforms providers and say, how can this be part of the news story that is not just to sell ads or to make people dopamine driven, but to have this dream of doing something? Because I think we're this close to that. And I think most people know we have a problem, but this platform might be able to create that sort of small extra momentum and say, how do we make that story to be told? And just measure, and I think be super specific. Ask people in the Global South, Global North, a couple of people, take a couple of hundreds of thousands of people and say, what will their world look like? What kind of hours, minutes are being told these different stories? How much do they listen to Masambas and the Flourishing Life? How much do they listen about the need for buy something and that is not healthy for you? So that would be my challenge. Hello, Google, Facebook, TikTok, and all the platforms. Please join us in this.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry, Masamba.
I just would like to challenge you on one specific thing and follow up on what we have said. I agree with what we have said, but for us to be able to say, hey, how are you contributing to a world that is providing flourishing life in a healthy planet, we need to be able to define precisely what does it means. And more than defining it, people should be able to feel it, to touch it, to know what it is about. So how do we get there? I think this is the challenge. So far, we have been very good in describing what the collapse looks like, but we have not been enough good in clearly describing in the daily life of individual citizen what flourishing life, a society that is providing flourishing life to the many people in a healthy planet, what does it mean concretely? What does it look like?
I 100% agree. I'll give that to you. But I think there is already One Planet Living. There's a lot of things that are showing these kind of things. And what I think is important is what you say, what I want to maybe just, before I hand over the mic, say, it needs to show that there's many different lifestyles. That, because sometimes I think people get this idea that there's one specific future that is sustainable. No, there will be artists, there will be researchers, there will be adventurers, there will be car lovers, there will be garden lovers that are sustainable. But let's find those examples and make them very concrete so people say, this is people of flesh and blood that are passionate. And I hope next year we will have people from the outdoor industry, from the music industry and others to say, we are actually quite close to flourishing lives and or with very small footprints. This is how people can do things, or artists, etc. So, sorry, I should not take the mic anymore.
So I love the challenge, and I absolutely think that we should put that forward. I'm very methodical in the way that I work. And to kind of go back to what I was saying right at the very beginning is before we share these stories, and before we perhaps create these stories, right, through different formats, I think the first thing we need to do is listen. And we need to create that two-way dialogue. People want to be heard. And I think this is where your work really comes in, Dennis. I think it's about understanding what matters to these people, right? It's what does a flourishing life mean to you? And I think if we put that question forward, we start to understand where this need for that dopamine hit comes from. Because if that's what you're chasing, it might come from hitting add to cart, or it could come from going out and being a part of your community and planting trees together. But the fact of the matter is, people don't know what they don't know. So we're all looking at life through the lens of our past experiences, through what we've been fed, through whatever knowledge we have been fortunate enough to garner. But there is still so much out there, right? So in the first instance, I would say let's listen. Let's understand what people's purpose is. What is that driving factor? And then let's create the stories to show them that there is an alternative out there. And let's make that mainstream, and let's bring in these different voices and these different creative artists, and even the private sector, even the public sector. Let's bring them into the conversation, because going back to Masamba's point, we should not be working in silos, right? And even if we kind of go out and start talking to communities and we start talking to individuals, again, we're doing ourselves a disservice, because we're then eliminating that whole umbrella that sits above. So I think to answer your question, my next step would be, how do we listen better? How do we create a platform that allows people to share their views and be heard?
Thank you. I'll be quick because I think we're already out of time. But yes, I mean, I completely agree. I think as a concrete next step, putting the question out there, you know, what is a flourishing life for you? And then like hopefully get some sort of input back. I don't know if you're looking for, you know, in video format and just like text format or so on. And then once you feel like, you know, you've built a critical mass also across geographic areas and so on, and the picture starts to show, I think that's then when you can go forward, you know, and try to find for collaborators to make the message known, you know, and then to streamline it across or scale it across different channels and so on. So definitely agree with everything that was said.
Last question for all of you. Who are the stakeholders that need to be brought on board in this journey?
I think what you said, we shouldn't exclude anyone, but if I should highlight two that are usually forgotten, there are the startup community incubators where many passionate people already exist with their stores that try to do something. So that's why we created this Gigaton opportunity challenge to bring people together. The other one are the people that sit on the media platforms that actually shape the narratives and tells what we see. I think those two groups together, because that's one are people that we need to listen to that are trying to shape tomorrow. The other one are the people that are shaping what we see as possible and what we think. I think these two people are very important, and in that shaping sphere is sort of the media groups, but also PR agencies and others, but also the people that are running campaigns on Instagram and other places that are shaping things. So those are the two things I to start by discussing on how do we collaborate and create these new narratives. But I think also starting small. It doesn't need to be huge, but you're saying maybe once a day or once a month, start looking at what would a flourishing life. Open up all the media platforms once a year at least to have your feedback and say, what do you really dream about and how can we help that? So I think just starting creatively and not just saying we're going to reform the whole system totally, but you start by introducing this idea of flourishing lives and listening.
Thanks. I mean, I agree, but I think this is already like the next step in my point of view. But you know, from what we said first, understanding what is a flourishing life, I think it needs to go to the individual level. You know, how do you reach civil society across the globe? You know, that you really have all types of perspectives seen and heard and so on. So the individual level, and then yes, the key stakeholders. You've mentioned some of them. Yes.
It's really difficult because you know, the instinct is to say everyone, but when you try to reach everyone, quite often you reach no one because you really do need to be more targeted, right? And I think I would agree with what both of you have said. I think Dennis, you mentioned the youth and the change makers of tomorrow, as it were, and I think it's important to listen to them because the world is changing so rapidly that if we are not already talking to, you know, children even who are incredibly wise when it comes to, and very unfiltered when it comes to sharing what it is that they're looking for or what a flourishing life looks like for them, I think it's very difficult for us to build something that's going to respond to that. So I would say the youth, primarily.
One additional question. So I know that particularly when it comes to youth, there is a tendency not to, let's say, have adhesion to whatever is related to some extent to faith. We have seen in many countries that faith is stepping back. But it's full of wisdom. I'm wondering whether they should not be also part of the game. Maybe we need to find a new wave of leveraging the wisdom faith is full of, even if you do not name it faith. Because most of the time when you say faith, particularly the youth, they run away. We don't want this. But maybe the wisdom of faith can be leveraged without naming it face. And at one point in time, later on, people will just realize that, oh, in fact, some of the key value that make them act are actually related to spirituality. I think there is also space for spirituality there, but would like to have your view on that.
I 100% agree. Role of faith or belief or something deeper, transcendence. And that's actually what I usually talk about is the youth. But actually one group that I think is often forgotten is the elders, where reflection and transcendence and the prospect of death in the quite near term usually brings wisdom and a kind of spirituality that is lost in us, our age, that are in business, trying to deliver something. So I think youth, they look at the world with unfiltered eyes and don't see really boundaries. But the old, I think, is a lost community also that has lived through many of these changes and usually sits on wisdom and spirituality in a way that our economic and short-term and efficient society often loses. So I think that really brings that kind of wisdom and deeper thinking is very important. But that's also, in a more technical language, that's what we talk about also, serotonin. The spiritual hormone, the one that when you hold a baby or you're out in the forest or you look at the stars, not when you consume something. So how to find that space? And I think that's something that is lacking again, because that is not when we produce things, not when we deliver things, but that's where we actually live. So I think that's really an important question that you bring, Masamba, and that's something that my son said. Why don't each city have a temple for nature, where you can go and, because you have different schools of religion, etc. But what are the new places for people that might not be in a specific religion, but where we all can meet also in awe of nature and the world that we live in. So I think that's also something that needs to be discussed in terms of the kind of narratives. Where are those being born? Because today there might not be spaces, because so much is just about consumption and short-term satisfaction. But where are the places of that kind of spiritual, deeper things? And that's why we have been working also with the outdoor industry, because I think nature might be one of the places that you can bring that connection to, because that's when we feel that we are quite small as human beings, and that you were talking about experience the weathers and the power of nature. So I think the outdoor industry can be a very powerful partner, because people look into nature and experience nature just because they look for that kind of connection, and that can be religious or spirituality, but it's a deeper reflection on who you are.
I feel like we could have an entirely different panel on just discussing this one topic. But I think you raised a really good point. I think when it comes to faith, it really is about connection, and it's about oneness. I think it's this idea of, as I mentioned earlier, this question that we ask ourselves of what difference can I as an individual make? But really, if we look at what's at the foundation of every religion, of any faith, it's that you are part of something bigger. And I think if we can bring some of those learnings and that wisdom forward in the messaging, in the storytelling, I think that's incredibly important. And I completely agree with actually what you said about bringing the optimism and hope of the youth with the wisdom and knowledge of the elders. I think if we can find a way to combine that and not just, again, not look at them in silos, but say, how do we both look at the shared challenge that we face as humanity, and how can we bring our two different perspectives, or our many, many different perspectives, in finding a solution that actually works for all of us? Because, and again, I think that comes back to community and really engaging with community. I mean, we've been very fortunate, and we had a mangrove planting session as one of our community events a few weeks ago, and our youngest member was 3 years old, and our eldest was in her 80s. So to bring those different demographics together and to be able to have them in one place, planting something, creating life. I mean, what's more spiritual than that, right?
I mean, this discussion, you know, is huge and could be much broader still, and could go on and on and on. And I mean, it makes me just, you know, in my head, it's just like raising more questions. You know, it's, of course, youth and the elderly are important. You know, there are these lifelong surveys across what is happiness and so on. You know, so of course, you know, when you're old, you have a much different view on life than you had when you're young. But it also makes me think, you know, what about other stakeholders? Should nature be a stakeholder? You know, what about animals that can't, you know, give their inputs in like the spoken language that we use? So I mean, as I said, this could go on and on and on, you know, but it goes back to our initial question: what is a flourishing life, you know, and who decides it in the end?
But it is a very fundamental question: who is given a voice? And I think that you mentioned two things that are usually forgotten: youth and the elders, but then also future generation and nature. And maybe just by these four having a space and being discussed, we that back in the early climate negotiations, if the climate negotiations would have empty chairs for the future generations, nature, the elders, and the youth, because they're not part of these negotiations in the same way. So I think there's some creative way when we can start actually discussing those very fundamental questions: who is given the voice? And that I think that path on a more deeper spiritual relationship to what we are, and acknowledging that our small little sliver of knowledge right now is just a sliver, and we have so much still to learn. And that's the sort of what I would like to end is this positive note that the young should understand that they are living in a quantum realm, and the knowledge about the universe is on a new level, but also that we need to take a different care of this own little planet. For those who haven't listened to Carl Sagan's The Play Blue Dot, when he describes that we all on these little things hovering in space, and all our fights is on that little space. That's sort of that kind of spiritual message, that we share this little voyage through this dark together, is something that I hope a new generation also can think about and say that we are the first one that can allow everyone to live a flourishing life in harmony with nature, so that other living beings are also here and welcome on this little small blue dot. And we can do that for first time in history. And hopefully this was the first step towards that.
So, so one thing that seems to get out of this dialogue is that if we want to achieve the Sustainable Development Goal, we need also to act on our inner development goal. Very important point. And coming back to the notion of listening, because I really like the concept of listening. It's important, but I see one challenge. Most of the time, when we are listening to people, they tend to share with us what they want, not what they need. How can we listen to people and ensure that what we will hear is really what they truly need, not what they say they want? Because we agree that what they want is polluted by the environment. So what is of interest for us is what they really need. How do we engage with them, listen to them, and understand what is it that they need?
It's not that difficult. It's just allowing people to wear, as I said, New Year resolutions, for instance, when people reflect, when they sit with family and friends and think, what do I want to be? But then when they go out on the city, that's where we see the conflict. Then they are buying these new things and buying this fast car and doing all these things. So how do we deal with that tension and start discussing that? How come that you have dreams that seems to be reflective and part of a more accepted flourishing life through basically what all religions have said? Now we basically have the sins, greed, gluttony. Things are celebrated in one way, but that is not really what we want as people. So I think finding places where people really formulate that in their own safe space, not when they're stressed, not when they're out running on the city and back from the work and just trying to buy something, take care of the children and everything. That is not it. We need to find spaces when people are things what they really feel. And I think this, just having this idea of my legacy today, start thinking, what do I want to leave behind? Most religions, most wise people have said, every once in a while you should try to think back when you're old and say, what would you have liked to do? If you try to be happy in the moment, you're usually not very happy over time. So, and that is sort of, neoclassic economics have fooled us and said that we are rational beings. We try to select what's good for us, but we're not. We're complicated human beings that have short-term urges and long-term wishes. And we need to find a way to have a better balance between those. Now it's very much our short-term urges that are dominating for the short-term satisfaction. So I think just having those spaces, and I think the New Year resolutions, why can't they be sent and shared on global platforms and say what the global community really wants when they look towards the future? And that can be anonymous. You can have trolling and all things, but really have a voice of what people say, this is the future I want to create. I think the big challenge is also that many people feel disempowered. They feel they're not listened to. You see that in many political systems, that people are almost angry and they're voting for people that they don't really believe in, but they're so angry on the current system that they want something else. So I think that's also, how can we create a place where people are not angry, but feel that they have a voice that are part and listened to, that we will actually be part of shaping something, that they get empowered. And I think you mentioned a number of times that this empowerment is so important. So one thing that I usually start with is saying, what would you have liked to have given to society? If that is helping youth, if that is writing poetry, creating music, whatever that is, we want to empower you so you can do that. And if people feel that they can give something to society, they usually feel very excited, because very often they feel very disempowered and they feel they are being told what to do, and they feel they are in a situation where they don't really feel that they are the full person. One of the things that combines that most all people feel is that no one really understands who I am. And that's a horrible, we shouldn't have that society. We should have a society where people feel that they can tell what they want and that they are listened to. So sorry being a bit emotional, but I think that sort of really deep feeling of connectivity and asking people how they can contribute is really important, because most people today feel that they are, taking things and are not really part of a movement of making things better. So we need to have that really, and it comes back to your listening to people. What's your voice of giving? But also putting pressure on people and saying, you are a human being that can give and contribute something. You're not just here to take and consume and feel satisfying in the moment. That is very, that's a narrow way of a human being. And most of us don't want that. And I actually have never had a person who don't want to give something to society when you sit down and discuss with them.
I'm very conscious of time. But I said at the very beginning that we all have a story, right? And I had an interesting conversation with our editorial team the other day, where we were talking about how everyone has a story, but not everyone knows how to tell that story. And I think to Masamba's point, when people are asked a question, they very often will just respond and you get a surface level answer. And there is a certain art to being able to ask questions in a way that get you from understanding what people's want is to what people's need is. And I think when we talk about listening, it's not simply just about giving people a platform to speak, but it's about approaching it with from a place of compassion and curiosity, and asking questions in a way where I genuinely want to hear what you need as a human. And I think if we can kind of master that, that is pretty special. And I think a very good way, actually, going back to the wisdom of children, I don't have children, but I have friends who have kids, and something that they have a tendency to do is when they're curious about something is they'll just keep going, but why? But why? And no matter what answers you give them, they'll come back with, but why? And I think we need to start asking that. I think we need to ask why. And quite frankly, that's the basis of all the stories that you see on the Climate Tribe platform. we really try to focus on people's why. So that would be my answer.
I just wanted to mention, it goes a little bit into the direction, that we've almost stopped asking the question why. It's also what Dennis had mentioned before. Sometimes it's just, we think we know what it is, but it's all about the short term. And, we're caught in this hamster wheel, but it goes back into the, what is the next step? So we kind of have to, the ship is already sailing, but how do we paint it a different color while it is sailing, basically. So I think that's where we need to think, how do we want to change the storytelling behind it and so on while we're all caught up more or less in the hamster wheel already.
I think it's an excellent way to conclude. But why? That's a very important question. Actually, we build our questionnaire to identify what are the core human needs and how people would like to satisfy them by responding to this basic question, but why? But why? Because if you continue to ask the question, but why, at the end, you will arrive to the thing that is really needed. All the other things are means to get there. But the ultimate response is what is needed. So thank you all. So it was really a great conversation. For me, it was, I had an agenda because we wanted to have more clarity, better understanding of what we would like to do, how we should be doing it. All these sessions are streamed live and recorded. I will come back to this session and listen very carefully to your different input, and definitely it will serve the next steps in our project of raising public awareness on how to address this big challenge. So thank you again for your contribution. It was good to be able to have more than...
Yeah. Is there
without,
another session?